My name is Gustav Arentoft. I'm one of the co-founders at StableNode, and I'm also a contributor still today at Maker. I've been working on the growth, business development, scaling for Maker for quite a while. And at StableNode, one of the main verticals we have is governance. So today we're going to talk a little bit about governance. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of the governance landscape as we see it today. We're going to go through why we need decentralized governance, the different types of governance, how to create and use governance frameworks, how to secure governance pre-token voting, and then also some DAO coordination. And then we're going to look into what's next for the decentralized governance. So as of today, we see mostly the very popular DAO types. We see the protocol DAOs, which is one of the ones that I'm also part of at Maker. We see also things such as Aave or Uniswap, and in general we see most of the protocols, whether it's DeFi or NFT-based protocols, they want to move towards DAO governance and basically set up a community-driven project rather than having it controlled by an internal entity. We've also seen a lot of very popular investment DAOs that also requires a very different governance framework. And I think probably two of the most famous ones here, Metacartel and Pleaser DAO. Pleaser DAO focusing on art, and Metacartel focusing on protocols. We also see layer one and staking DAOs. Again, they're also very different. They're very focused on how to tackle technical problems on the base layer of a blockchain. I think of course we all know the different big layer ones, but on top of Ethereum, for example, we have Lido DAO, which will be crucial in regards to the ETH 2.0 staking infrastructure, which will probably be one of the most significant DAOs we have on Ethereum going forward. And I think in general, we often hear, when we talk with teams and so on, we often hear people have different perceptions of why we need governance. And this is of course talking from our own experiences and what we believe in, and a lot of the stuff that we preach to the communities we help with. But in general, when you're setting up governance, I just maybe wanna highlight the bottom sentence first. That governance does not necessarily equal better decision making or better outcomes. People often have this, perception that well, if we just implement decentralized governance, we will have 100 smart people coming in, and they will solve, all the problems that we have. But this is rarely the case. So therefore, we kind of need to take a step back and think about why is it we actually need it, right? And a big part of it is protection for the users and kind of ensuring the protocol's resilience. These things primarily comes in under centralization risk mitigation. So if you have a protocol that is purely built by a team that is very tied to the production and development of a DeFi protocol, it's very easy to target this team, both for regulators, but also with security issues. We have seen a lot of problems with, for example, the handling of multi-sigs. And also just if you have rogue individuals internally, they can actually manipulate the outcome of the system, which means that if you have this big centralization risk, it can really mean a big problem for your users, right? Another thing, of course, it is great to get community input and participation, but again, when you open up your protocol direction to inputs from the users themselves, that also means you get a lot of different opinions, a lot of different backgrounds on how they think you should move forward. And just in general, if we look at efficiency of a company, for example, versus the political system, a DAO-based governance reminds quite more of a political system, a democratic political system, where of course, if you have a small group of individuals who controls a company, they will almost always reach more efficient and faster decisions, right? The more people you want to include in the decision process, the longer it will take, and the outcome will be much more nuanced. It won't necessarily always be so precise. And this is something we've also seen at Maker a lot, where we kind of like for like a very long time had like two big groups of people in the community, right? We had the ones who wanted to scale Maker using more centralized assets, such as real-world assets, other stable coins, ensuring the peg stability, ensuring more collateral in the protocol. And then we had the other camp, which was like we should just use decentralized assets. We should primarily use ETH. Even wrapped Bitcoin is not so good. So like all of a sudden you have like kind of like a branch of the team that would value, for example, decentralization much higher than scalability, right? And without saying there's like no wrong or right answer, but it's just kind of like a statement as to what happens when you open up this for like the community, right? And then the bottom sentence here, like it is an opportunity to create equal access for the community to drive the project direction if it's done properly. But again, this direction is very rarely uniform, right? You will have a lot of different people who have different opinions on like where to go. So how do we deal that in the different types of governance, right? So on like a protocol governance, right, you need to have at least like some kind of like ability to push proposal through, and you need to have like some kind of way of connecting what actually gets pushed through to actually being built. So this is like another thing that we have seen in some of the DAOs already, especially like the protocol DAOs, the DeFi DAOs, and so on, is that you do still have things that like if they get pushed through, you need the developers to actually build it, right? And this is something where I think that we will see this more and more coming up as like a problem, that if you have like a very active governance community, you will see like a lot of proposals being approved, but without necessarily having like a priority ranking for them, right? So like how do you deal with 50 different proposals being accepted if the protocol engineers only have time to implement a couple a month, right? And this is also something that like imposes like another layer of like complexity, is like how do you strategically prioritize what gets pushed through? Because again, like from what I referenced before, you can like have two camps, right? So if you have two camps inside the community and both of them are able to push proposals through, well, then you will basically have like the protocol engineering team potentially like choosing which direction to go to, because they can kind of like prioritize what actually gets built first. For like the layer ones, there's like some other issues that we have seen. For example, the fact that like, let's say that you're doing governance as a validator, you see that, for example, the block history has been altered by the blockchain themselves. What do you do about something like this, right? Because like you as a validator, your entire income and revenue stream relies on people staking with you. So if you come out with proposals that in the short term might create a negative outcome for the price of the network itself, so you basically make like the token price drop, well, then most people will just undelegate from you. So like on L1 governance, we see there's both like the technical governance that they're doing, so like how to implement protocol upgrades, how to focus on where like the technical development of the L1 goes. And then we kind of like see like the checks and balances, which like from my perspective, and there's been like a lot of people talking about this. We ran a governance workshop with all the big Cosmos validators a couple of weeks ago in Lisbon, and like this is like a pretty like clear problem that all of them are seeing right now, is that you as a validator have a very hard time coming out with anything that isn't like purely positive. And for example, it happened both with like Cosmos and Polkadot that we see like proposals coming in from the community that would make like a short-term pump in price. So like basically like let's put like $500,000 into like a marketing campaign or something like that is like purely focused on like price speculation, which is like can be quite hurtful for the protocol in like the long term, right? Because you get a lot of like short-term participants coming in only to take profit. You create a lot of volatility around the token price. But if you as like a validator goes against something like that, this happened, for example, to Stakefish, one of the bigger validators that we also work with, that they basically came in and said like, no, this is like not good. This can be like hurtful for the project in the long term. And they lost a lot of delegators. So they lost a lot of their stake because the retail community was like, well, you're saying no to something that will make my tokens go up. So therefore you must be a bad validator. So L1 governance is also like quite complicated in that front right now, and we're looking into like how to basically build like different frameworks that could like help alleviate this pressure, right? And like one of them could, for example, be to separate the governance from the delegators. And then, of course, I think probably like the easiest governance is investment DAOs. I'm part of one myself, the Mega Mafia DAO. And with most of the DAOs, it basically works very similar to like a multisig. So if there's 10 members and the multisig is 6 out of 10, you get a project in, and you're like, well, how many people think we should invest in this? And if 6 out of 10 says yes, you can sign the transaction and the money is sent. Of course, for example, like Metacartel and Pleaser DAO, of course, grew into something that is quite a lot bigger than just like a small group of people. So they would have to, again, implement like different tools or frameworks. And especially something I'm going to talk a little bit later on is like the coordination of the community is very important as well. So for example, like one of the frameworks we have with Maker is that we have a governance process that is, of course, like quite rigorous because, a lot of the decisions being taken at Maker are quite big and strict. So, you start with a forum discussion, you do a formal submission of the proposal, you do like a forum poll, then you continue the discussion after the poll. If the poll passes or doesn't pass, should we change something in the proposal? Should we let it pass through? And then in the end, it goes on to like the token vote. And basically, one of the things that like kind of like came out from like how do we actually build a process like that for Maker, for example, is that you have like some different questions you need to ask yourself in regards to the decisions that you're taking, right? So what is like the importance of the decision? And this is, for example, why like an investment DAO can take a quite lighthearted decision, right? Oh, are we going to invest $100,000 in this project? Maybe yes, maybe no. It's not like that big of a deal whether they do it or not. But like in Maker, like should we onboard this collateral type that potentially could scale into hundreds of millions of dollars? It's like a pretty big decision because if like poor decisions are taken around a process like that, you could basically end up indebting the entire protocol with hundreds of millions of dollars because the collateral goes bad or goes sour, right? So whenever you're looking at these frameworks, it's very important to start asking yourself, like, how rigorous of a process do we need? And that starts with like the importance level of the decisions. Then you also need to figure out like who are like the actual stakeholders in these proposals, right? So like if you choose to like push a proposal through, like how is it going to be built? How is it going to be maintained? Who should be included in the process because of that? So like, do you need like risk valuation? Who do you need to build it from the protocol engineering side? Do you need a front end to be built? So all of these stakeholders are like important to have like part of the process of sell as well. And then it's also important to kind of like push in like the alignment of the coordination between the teams and the stakeholders. So this is just like some of the questions. We run like governance workshops as well. So at StableNode, we help a lot of our, both early stage partners and investments to build the entire like framework from scratch. And like depending on the protocol type, the decision makings they want to take, we have like, like a big difference in like the frameworks and like how rigorous we actually think that they should be. And in some cases, they don't need that much scrutiny over it. But in other cases, it's very important that you have like a framework that kind of like puts into like the level of the importance of the decision itself. Another thing that is also very important, which is like an error that we often see in like smaller and like newer protocols, is that their like governance pre-token voting is very poor. So if you have a protocol where like, you just put up like a forum post or something and then you go straight to token voting, this creates like a process that is very skewed towards large holders. So basically, we have like this like pancake situation where like a single whale just like pushed through like a proposal. We've also seen like, I don't know if you guys heard about like the Uniswap DeFi education fund that came from, a big Ivy League school in the US, and it was basically just pushed through some of like the big VCs, and there was like a big community outrage about it, right? Because if we have a protocol that can be governed just by like a couple of big holders, even though the entire community itself is against the proposal, you're again in like a problem, right? So like one of the things that we always look a lot at is like how do we actually create processes that enables you to define the decision before you ever use a token to vote with. And this is also something that like it's like a pretty complicated topic, of course, because you want to make sure that like individual holders have stuff to say, but of course you also want to recognize the stake the bigger holders have in the system, right? But something that is like super important, especially as we see like a lot of these protocols moving forward. Also, another thing which is also like important to mention here is that often the biggest holders in the protocol will be like early investors and the team. So if you have like a setup like that doesn't have this in it, you also can again create like centralization risk, because like often the team, the contributors and so on will have a much bigger stake in the protocol than like the average retail community, who, if your goal is decentralization, you need to have like a very spread out community, of course. Then there's like another thing right now, which is like, this is like very up these days, because we see more and more teams kind of like relying a lot on chat. So right now we are working with several teams where like the main part of their governance, including decision making, happens on Discord. And on Discord you kind of like, you have like a lot of information all the time, which basically means that if you like looking away for like one day, you have like 1,000 messages and it's very difficult to participate in the conversation. So we always try to kind of like move any decisions onto like the forum. You can have calls about it, but whenever you have something that actually needs to be like decided, like voted upon, always move it to the forum. It's also very important that in like the forum you have like a good structure and overview. This is like, for example, like the Maker forum, where you can see, we have like all of these categories. It's very easy to find like what you're looking for. If you go into like a newer DeFi protocol, you'll often see it being like very messy. We also preach a lot that like almost all protocols should have like a dedicated governance workforce, because governance is a lot about coordination. It is basically figuring out how do we get everyone to put in their voice, how do we get everyone to coordinate when we're implementing these things, both in regards to like the community, the voters, the internal teams, the protocols, like the people need to build the things, the developers, everything needs to be coordinated. And that is something that actually requires like dedicated personnel. Another thing is also just the more decisions you have, the more time you would need to read through the forums every week. And for example, like the more time spent on the forum is like time you cannot really do other work. We have used a tool called Source Credit Maker, which is quite cool. It's like the more engagement activity you have on the forums, you actually get paid. It's not like a large pay, but at least for like a lot of people, it enables them to spend those 2-3 hours a night, a couple of nights a week, to basically be up to date with everything and participate. And then like the last slide, like where do we go from here? We see like a lot of problems now with governance overhead. So like just from like experience, like what we hopefully will see in the future is like more like governance minimization. It's not every project you can implement these things in. It's not everywhere where you can actually push the governance down to like a minimum level. But I think like going forward, we will see like a lot of the successful governance methods or frameworks and protocols is where they don't have like an insanely big overhead. Because like the more people need to coordinate in the decision, the more it ends up reminding of like a political system. And as all of you guys probably know, like politics in general is like super messy and maybe not like the best system for decision making. But this is like what governance will turn into unless you try to minimize the setup. We also see like a lot of like dedicated like governance teams and individuals. We're trying to become one of them, or already are one of them. We also see, like people like Gauntlet, for example, who is like one of the big delegates at Aave. We ourselves like the lead governance delegate at InstaDiab. And because governance is so labor intensive right now, we see like a lot of this like governance as a service, or like external actors coming in and wanting to like supply their expertise to DAOs to basically help them formulate the decision that happens. You could kind of like draw similarities to like how like a lot of big traditional companies would hire like consultants to come in and help them out. Of course, like with DAOs, there's like endless possibilities, and these were just like a couple of the things that I see is happening right now. And of course, it was also only a 20-minute presentation, so I couldn't go quite into depth with everything, but I hope you enjoyed it. So thank you very much. And actually right now, you know, if you guys are looking to dive more into the world of DAOs and governance, we're actually hiring like a dedicated governance facilitator at StableNode. So if you guys are interested in that, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or visit our website where we also have an email you can talk to. So thank you very much.